Have you ever wondered why certain things arrive in your life long after you stop praying for them? A child once knelt beside her bed, whispering words into the shadows with the kind of faith that only innocence can hold. Her hands clasped, her eyes closed tight. She asked not for toys or riches, but for her father to come home. He never did. Years passed. She forgot the prayer. Life hardened in layers, disappointments, transitions, noise. And yet one day in a quiet cafe, a stranger paid for her coffee, left a note, and walked away. That note led her to a reunion, to a story she had never known, to a truth buried deep in time. Her father had searched, prayed, wept, repented, and somehow, through a series of invisible threads, they were brought together. The prayer was forgotten, but it was not lost. There are prayers that move like seeds through the soul's soil, hidden, slow, invisible. They vanish from our conscious memory, yet they pulse in the eternal realm. Not everything uttered to God needs to be remembered by the one who speaks it. For in the divine economy, nothing genuine is wasted. The world teaches cause and effect, input and output, but the kingdom operates on mystery. A prayer released in pain may not return as an answer in kind. It may circle back years later, transfigured, refined, carrying not what was requested, but what is needed. There is a power in forgotten prayers, precisely because they are unchained from expectation. When a soul releases its need to control the outcome, it surrenders to something far wiser than its own will. You may think you've moved on, but heaven remembers. There was once a man, young, zealous, desperate to escape poverty. He prayed each night for success, begged for doors to open. When they didn't, he turned bitter. He built his own empire, chased gain, and forgot the God he once cried out to in the dark. Then came the collapse, a scandal, a silence, a fall from grace. And in that wreckage he returned, not to prayer, but to quiet. And in the quiet, a door opened, not to success, but to service. He began working in a halfway house, offering meals to those with less than he once had. He felt no miracles. He expected none. Until a boy approached him, eyes hollow, shaking from withdrawal. "I don't know why I trust you," the boy said, "but you feel like someone who once prayed for me." And in that moment, the man remembered. He had. Years ago, standing outside a shelter as a volunteer, he had prayed for a nameless teenager on the street corner. A prayer lost in the fog of memory, but heaven had kept it. Your forgotten prayers are folded into eternity like letters sealed in light. They do not expire. They do not fade. God is not on your timeline. His not yet is not never. His silence is not absence. His delay is not forgetfulness. And you, yes you, have likely been carried by the prayers of your younger self. Prayers made from hospital beds, school hallways, tear-streaked pillows. You may not recall the words, but heaven never deletes what love has spoken. There is a kind of healing that happens when you realize this. Not because your circumstances change, but because your story gains depth. The threads of your life, so tangled and frayed, begin to shimmer with divine embroidery. You start to see that you were never alone, that even in forgetting your soul had once launched a signal, and God received it. There is something sacred about what slips from the mind, but stays in the spirit. Forgotten prayers have no attachment. They no longer plead or pressure. They drift beyond ego, beyond outcome. In their forgetfulness, they become pure. It is in this purity that their power multiplies, not because of your strength or persistence, but because they were once spoken from the depths, those moments when the heart cracked open just enough for eternity to leak through. You may not remember the request, but heaven remembers the ache behind it. Some blessings come not when you are desperate, but when you are ready. And readiness is not always marked by strength. It is often marked by surrender. The kind of surrender that doesn't look like kneeling, but like continuing to walk when no answer comes. A woman once prayed in a hospital hallway, holding her mother's hand as machines beat beside her. She whispered, "Please, don't let me become cold if she dies." Her mother passed the next morning. In the months that followed, her grief was unspeakable. She buried the prayer with the body. Years later, at a grief support group she joined only to appease a friend, she met a man on the edge of despair. He could barely speak. She didn't have answers, but she sat beside him, week after week, in silence. Until one day he looked up and said, "You're the first person who hasn't tried to fix me. You just stayed warm." And suddenly she remembered. Her prayer had not stopped death, but it had transformed her into its antidote. This is how heaven works. It is not a vending machine for blessings. It is a furnace that shapes souls. And sometimes the answers come not in thunder, but in the gentle unfolding of your character. Not in external gifts, but in who you become when the world forgets your name and God holds your prayer in quiet hands. Stoic wisdom teaches that we cannot control external events, only our response to them. But Christian truth goes further. It proclaims that the Spirit intercedes for us with groans too deep for words. Even when we no longer know how to pray, even when we forget what we once cried out for, the Spirit has not stopped carrying those fragments toward the Father. You may walk into rooms today whose doors were opened by prayers you forgot to keep knocking on. You may receive peace in a season where you no longer ask for it, because a part of your soul once requested it in a language your mouth has since lost. This is the hidden rhythm of heaven, the secret music behind the visible noise. And you, listener, you have not been unheard. Perhaps you once asked to be loved rightly, but found only betrayal. Perhaps you once begged for safety, but were thrown into chaos. Perhaps you once cried out for direction, but only found delay. And now, maybe you no longer pray the way you once did. Maybe you've stopped believing that God hears the prayers you can't remember how to speak. But listen, this is not the end of your story. Every forgotten prayer is still moving, like buried seeds beneath winter soil. They don't die. They wait until the conditions are right, until your soul, softened by surrender, is ready to receive without grasping. And the blessing may not resemble what you imagined, but it will fit the shape of your soul. When time passes and no answer comes, the mind begins to make assumptions. It whispers lies born from old wounds. Perhaps the prayer was too small. Perhaps you were too broken. Perhaps God didn't listen after all. But the soul knows better. The soul, untouched by the ego's timelines, understands that eternity does not hurry, that heaven does not forget what was spoken in sacred longing, even if it was whispered only once, beneath breath, through tears. There was a boy who once asked for light, not metaphorically, literally. His nights were filled with fear. His home, a quiet war zone. Every evening he'd sit by his window and beg for someone to see him, for some signal that he wasn't alone in the dark. No light came, not for years. He forgot the prayer, grew older, built walls within himself to survive. Walls so high, not even his own memories could scale them. He became successful, clever, admired, but cold. Until the night his apartment building lost power. All electricity failed. He stumbled in the dark, cursing, reaching for his phone. Nothing. Then, through his window, a single flicker. Across the alley, a woman had lit a candle. She stood by her own window, humming. It wasn't meant for him. She didn't even know he existed. But something broke inside him. He wept, not from fear, but from remembrance. He had once asked for light, and there it was, not dramatic, not divine in appearance, but perfectly timed to unravel the lie that he was forgotten. This is the subtlety of God's response. It does not always rush in with fire. Often it arrives like a whisper in the ruins, not to dazzle, but to draw the soul home. Forgotten prayers often return in forms you cannot trace. They arrive through people you never expected, in moments so ordinary that only a softened heart can recognize them. You who are listening, perhaps your heart has grown tired of asking. Perhaps you believe you've failed spiritually because you don't feel the same fire, the same need, the same clarity you once had. But even that weariness can become worship. There is no expiration on holy desire. There is no penalty for having forgotten what you once longed for, because God did not forget. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it." But deeper still, Christian wisdom adds, even when our thoughts fail us, grace does not. You are not at the mercy of your memory. You are carried by mercy itself. Every cry once offered in honesty has been absorbed into the eternal. Every prayer, once detached from ego, continues to live as intercession, moving like wind through the unseen, shifting pieces into place not for your comfort, but for your becoming. Sometimes you ask for safety and are instead given courage. Sometimes you ask for love and are instead given a breaking that makes you capable of truly receiving it. Sometimes you ask for answers and are instead given a silence that teaches you to listen. The prayer is not lost. It is transforming, and you are being prepared to receive it, not as the person you once were, but as the person you are becoming. That's the hidden power. Some prayers are too heavy for the soul to carry long, so we release them, intentionally or not, into the vastness of forgetfulness, not out of disbelief, but out of necessity. The heart cannot live in constant hunger. At some point, it learns to breathe without answers. And in that space, between longing and letting go, something ancient begins to stir. The Hebrews once understood prayer not merely as petition, but as remembrance. Not reminding God, but reawakening the soul to its own truest hunger. Yet even when that hunger sleeps, even when the desire fades into dust, heaven still moves. This is the mystery, that what you have forgotten may be the very thing God is still shaping your life around. There was a girl who used to sing to herself each night, praying to be seen, not by fame, not by a crowd, but by one person who would understand the language of her silence. Years passed, she silenced the song, chased productivity, grew as guarded, accomplished. Until one day in the most mundane of meetings, someone looked at her and asked, "What's the song you hum when you think no one's listening?" She hadn't even realized she still hummed it, but somehow he had heard, and something old, something sacred, returned. She had asked once to be seen, and then forgotten, but heaven had not. This is the sacred unfolding of prayers left behind. They are not wasted. They are woven into paths, into people, into places you had no map for when you first cried out. And when they return, if they return, they often wear disguises. You may not recognize the answer at first. It may seem too subtle, too quiet, too late. But that's because the soul must be shaped before the blessing can be. If the answer had come in your old season, you may have worshipped the gift over the giver. But now you are different, softer in the right places, humbled, patient. You no longer demand, you discern. This is how God prepares you to receive what your spirit once asked for, not by delivering quickly, but by sanctifying deeply. And if the answer never comes the way you expected, could you still believe that the prayer was heard? Could you trust that the prayer is not only about the thing, but about the transformation that happens in the waiting, the forgetting, and the remembering? There is a prayer deeper than words. It rises from your being, not your vocabulary. Even when your lips are silent, your longing still speaks. You may not know what you need, but God does. You may not remember what you once asked for, but God never forgets. You may have stopped praying altogether, burned by disappointment, dulled by time. And still, grace chases you not because of your strength to speak, but because of his resolve to respond. Seneca wrote, "No man was ever wise by chance, but in the mystery of the kingdom, it's not chance, it's providence. The kind that remembers forgotten prayers, answers unspoken questions, and fulfills long-buried desires in ways no mind could orchestrate." You don't have to remember the prayer. You only have to remain open, because sometimes the answer is already here, waiting not for your recognition, but for your readiness. There is a moment, subtle and easily missed, when the soul realizes it is no longer searching, not because it has given up, but because something has shifted. The ache once sharp becomes sacred. The void once dreaded becomes a dwelling place, not of despair, but of mystery. This is where forgotten prayers begin to return, not as answers, but as revelations. It is not the thing itself that reappears, but the truth behind it. The prayer you once whispered for love may come back as a deeper capacity to give it. The plea for healing may return as empathy so profound. Others find peace just standing near you. The cry for purpose may manifest as presence, fully rooted, finally awake. You begin to see that the delay was never denial, it was design. A father once prayed that his child would follow in his footsteps, would inherit the family trade, the name, the honor. But the child chose art and drifted far from tradition. The father was grieved, years of prayer wasted, he believed. They barely spoke. Until one day, long after the father had stopped praying, a painting arrived at his door. A portrait, not of the son, but of him. The brush captured not his posture, but his heart. And in the image he saw something he had never recognized. His child had seen him. Not his expectations, not his disappointment, but him. The prayer was answered, not by imitation, but by communion. This is how God answers. Rarely in the form you demand, always in the form your soul needs. You who are listening, perhaps your heart still secretly holds its unanswered cries. You have grown older, wiser, more detached. You've buried hope in a dignified way, convinced yourself it was never meant to be. And maybe you're right, but maybe, just maybe, it was meant to become something else. The dream may not return in its old clothing. It may show up barefoot, weathered, quiet. But if you look closely, you'll feel something stir. A resonance, a recognition, the echo of a prayer you once believed was gone. And in that moment, you will understand. It was never forgotten. It was transfigured. This is the hidden power of prayer. It does not just move heaven, it moves you, slowly, invisibly. Until one day you find yourself becoming the answer to someone else's cry. And without even realizing, you are walking in the harvest of what your former self once sowed. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. But the soul too is dyed by its prayers, especially the ones it forgets." Those forgotten prayers color your becoming. They carve the corridors of your character. They shape your silence. And one day when you least expect it, someone may touch your hand or look into your eyes or speak a sentence that unearths something holy, and you will remember. You will remember the moment you first cried out. And you will know it was never ignored. The mystery of forgotten prayers is not in their disappearance, but in their resurrection. They do not lie dead beneath the weight of time. They wait, buried like seeds beneath winter frost, silent but living, dormant but destined. Not because you held on, but because God never let go. And when they return, they do not come to please the ego. They come to awaken the spirit. You begin to see how little you truly understood when you first asked. You see how your words, though earnest, were shaped by fear or desperation or control, and you marvel not at how long the answer took, but at how much mercy was hidden in the delay. There is a holiness in unanswered longing. It teaches the heart to release its idols. It strips prayer of transaction and baptizes it in transformation. You stop praying to get something. You start praying to become someone. A man once asked God in his youth to make him strong. He imagined muscles, influence, power. But what came instead was weakness, chronic illness, broken dreams, years in obscurity. He stopped asking. He stopped hoping. And yet, decades later, as he stood beside his friend's hospital bed, holding a shaking hand, whispering peace with no fear in his voice, he realized he was strong. Not in the way he'd wanted, but in the way heaven had intended. His forgotten prayer had been answered. Not with might, but with mercy. You see, strength came, but it had been carved by surrender. This is the truth behind so many of our stories. God does not grant the prayer as it was spoken, but as it was meant. And sometimes the blessing is delayed because your soul is not yet the shape that can hold it. But when it comes, when it truly comes, you will recognize it not by sight, but by knowing. A deep, wordless resonance in your chest that whispers, "This is what I once asked for, before I knew how to ask." And that recognition will not make you proud. It will undo you, because you will see clearly. The delays were love. The silence was guidance. The forgetting was grace. And in that final release, you will understand. Your prayers were never just for answers. They were signals to heaven that you were ready to be changed. And heaven answered, not always with a yes, not always with what you remembered, but always with what would bring you back to Him. So now let go of the timeline. Let go of the shape you imagined. Let go of the voice that told you your prayer was too small, too selfish, too forgotten. Let it fall away, because even in your forgetting, heaven remembered. And what you planted in tears, you will one day reap in wonder. It was never forgotten, it was never wasted, it was always becoming.